All right, so a few questions from this week's presentation. Thank you for the good questions. So there were several questions about the Ginsberg confirmations, was sort of crystallized them. I understand the promotion of Just Say No. However, if he was a good candidate and he'd only smoked in the past, wouldn't it still be okay for him to serve on the court? I mean, and if the nomination were today, probably yes. I mean, we've had three consecutive presidents in Clinton, um, uh, W. Bush, and then Obama, who admitted to some form of, alcohol abuse in Bush's case, drug use in Clinton, and Obama's case. Um, there are a couple of things though that are going on with Ginsberg that basically sink the nomination. The first is that it's it's hard to overstate how much of a priority this had been for the first lady. So this is Nancy Reagan, um, with a jersey of the Washington football team. Just Say No. This is Doug Williams, who was the quarterback for the team, won a Super Bowl for them, and this was um, her signature issue as first lady, and so and she was a first lady of extraordinary influence in the Reagan administration as a whole, and especially influential in the closing years of the Reagan administration. Reagan eventually dies of Alzheimer's, and he's clearly not as mentally sharp in his last couple of years, and so politically, this is the Ginsburg thing is a real problem because this was such a high profile instance, and then Nancy Reagan is arguably her husband's chief advisor. I mean, she's a very, very influential figure. So that's the first thing. The second is that there had been an allegation. So the allegation against Ginsburg was not just that he had smoked marijuana as a student, but that he had done so as an assistant professor at Harvard Law School as well. And again, I'm sure that there were lots of professors in the after he graduates from law school who use marijuana, so he was hardly the first. But this distinction makes it more difficult for him to sort of mount a defense. But in terms of the reasons for which a Supreme Court nomination has been scuttled in American history, this is absolutely the it's the most absurd one. By the way, Ginsburg, who was a federal circuit court judge, he was on the D.C. Court of Appeals, which is really the most important of the federal appeals courts, remains on that court. He's still a senior member of the court. He serves on the court for decades in a very distinguished fashion, so he clearly was qualified to have been on the Supreme Court. But again, I'm not a big fan of, as you probably gathered by this point in the course, of the idea of historical inevitability. There's always lots of contingency in American history, and we'll be talking a lot about Anthony Kennedy over the last couple of weeks of the course. By all rights, Kennedy never should have been on the court. So as we think about Kennedy moving forward, keep the Ginsburg experience in the back of your mind. Second question, can it be argued that Scalia's nomination was more consequential to the future of the court than any other nominations for motions made during the Reagan administration? I think the answer here is absolutely yes. And this is a photograph of Reagan announcing the promotion of Rehnquist from Associate Justice to Chief Justice, and then the installation of Scalia. Reagan's other nomination, of course, was Sandra Day O'Connor, who is a historically very important figure because she's the first woman nominated to the Supreme Court, first woman who serves on the Supreme Court. But no one would describe O'Connor as a path-breaking justice. She has very few important opinions. Rehnquist's big issue on the court. Rehnquist was a reliable conservative vote, but his big issue was federalism. That is, trying to tighten the limitations on what the federal government could do. And there are some federalism decisions that check federal authority, but not a ton. And Rehnquist, I think, is most known for his conservative vote than his the power of his opinions. Scalia is a brilliant man. He's a gifted writer, and he's someone who can effectively tussle intellectually with with sort of the powerful liberal thinkers on the court. William Brennan in the early stages of Scalia's career, Ruth Bader Ginsburg, with whom he was very, very close personally throughout most of his career. Arguably Elena Kagan in the last few years he served on the court, and the power of Scalia's writing makes his opinions particularly influential as precedent. He's pushing the envelope often in opinions, and so helps shape constitutional law. So yes, I think of the three, Supreme Court actions that Reagan takes, Ginsburg, Kennedy, Scalia, and O'Connor. Scalia is the most influential intellectually. Now, the Kennedy issue is a trickier one. Kennedy is a far more influential justice than Sandra Day O'Connor was. But Kennedy, apart from issues relating to gay and lesbian equality, where he is, he is the justice in American history. He's really written all of the key opinions except for this most recent one. There isn't another issue where Kennedy is a critical figure. There's no real Kennedy jurisprudence in this respect. Although Kennedy is the more influential justice than O'Connor because Kennedy is so critical in these 5-4 votes. But still, I think Scalia is the dominant choice. Speaking of Kennedy, regarding the coalescing of Catholic Baptist Alliance around social issues, can you speak a bit more about the impact that the alliance had in terms of framing these issues before the courts and public policy? Other than making some noise about these issues, did the alliance have any long-lasting impact on legislation regarding abortion, gay marriage, etc.? So the answer here is yes, and there are a couple of things that are critical. The first is, it's sort of beyond the scope of this course, but for most of American history, there is an intense degree of suspicion between Baptists and Catholics. I mean, Baptists see Catholics as loyal to the Pope rather than to the United States. They see Catholicism as a kind of as not a real version of Christianity. John Kennedy, when he runs in 1960, there's a whispering and a not so whispering campaign against him because he's Catholic. That's associated most with Southern Baptists. He gives this famous speech about religious tolerance. He goes to Houston before Southern Baptists to make the speech. So this is an alliance which, until the emergence of social issues in the 1970s, simply had not existed. And it comes to exist in part because Baptists are looking for allies as they move back into the political mainstream with the abortion and then very soon thereafter gay rights fight, and partially because the American Catholic Church, which had really been quite liberal in the 1970s, a lot of liberals of social justice bishops, Rome tended to be tolerant of this, moves very very aggressively to the right in the 70s and 80s, as Pope John Paul II appoints very conservative justices and also prioritizes social issues over other aspects of a traditional Catholic agenda. And for an example of the impact, you can see the map here. So these are all of the states that passed constitutional amendments banning same-sex marriage. Those are in the kind of bright red here. Same-sex marriage and civil unions, which are the ones in states that are in crimson, and same-sex marriage, civil unions, and any kind of contractual arrangements, even between same-sex couples, Michigan and Virginia. And in all of these states, to varying degrees, there is an alliance between, conservative Protestant religious organizations, primarily the Baptists, but also the Mormons in the California fight, and the local Catholic Church. So this is a formidable social alliance, which I think has the greatest impact on same-sex marriage. Now, with regards to abortion, there is the effect of Roe means that the legislative avenues for opponents of abortion are far more limited. But the Catholic Church, does work with conservative Protestants on a variety of issues to impose waiting lists, to impose special requirements on abortion clinics, these kinds of things, designed to make abortion at least a little more difficult to obtain. So the answer is yes, and I mean, we'll be talking a little bit more about this next week when we begin with the issues associated with sexual orientation and the Constitution. But this is a big change to American history, this kind of alliance. That said, at least with regards to sexual orientation issues, this alliance, which seems so formidable, again, look at the map, has collapsed with almost breathtaking speed as you see public support for laws that discriminate against gays and lesbians has really just utterly collapsed in the last decade. And then the last question is what if, Annie, did the Thornburg-Ginglas Supreme Court have in voting outcomes for the Republican Party? And so, because I was talking about in the snippet, there are a bunch of these decisions that where the court seems to say that the voting these decisions tend to be very technical, and the court is constantly shifting its mind. But the basic thrust was, especially in the late 80s and 90s, the court seems to be saying that the Voting Rights Act requires the creation of House districts that are either so-called majority minority districts, that is more than 50% of the voters are minority, or very high plurality minority districts. And so, and to create districts that will be majority minority, you need to, the word is used, pack African American, or in some cases Hispanic voters into a district, even if that requires geographic elongation. And remember, I showed the map of Georgia in the snippets. Another example here is what occurs in North Carolina. So if you take a look at this is an infamous district. The Supreme Court eventually will say this district goes too far, but this 12th district here. So this is that's in yellow on the map. So this starts in in the Durham area, so Durham, Raleigh, which have significant African American populations. It then snakes through more rural areas. In some parts of this district are just a highway, to finish up in Charlotte, where it encompasses the majority Black areas of Charlotte. So the net result of this is a district that will elect an African American to the House, but you see all of these surrounding districts to the 12th district, the Black voters are being removed from those districts. So these districts tend to be much whiter and much more open to Republicans winning. You see a similar kind of district, maybe not quite as extreme in its drawing, in the 1st district, which is also majority African American districts. See all of these weird, tangling lines that it sort of goes. So this is sometimes called the effect of these district drawings is sometimes called bleaching. That is, that apart from the majority minority districts, the resulting districts are much whiter than the previous ones. And in the late 70s and 80s, Southern Democrats had begun to develop an alternative method to survive in the aftermath of the Voting Rights Act by combining overwhelming support from Black voters with minority support from white voters, 30 or 35%. But as Black voters are moved into these majority Black districts and out of surrounding districts, Southern Democrats in the House increasingly have to compete in districts that might be 75, 80, 85% white. And that doesn't mean they immediately lose their seats. A lot of these are districts that were represented by longtime Southerners who had been in Congress for 15, 20, 25 years, had ties to the local community. But many of these districts eventually will go Republican, either when the incumbent retires or when there's a really good Republican year, 1994, 2010. So the result now in a state like North Carolina, in 2018, they've redrawn their district lines again due to state court requirements. But in 2018, you had a map that was 10 white Republicans, 1 white Democrat, and 2 African American Democrats. So the net result of these kinds of decisions throughout the South is to change the demographics of Southern members of the House in the 1990s and 2000s. Dramatic decline in the number of white Democrats, dramatic increase in the number of African American and in Florida and Texas Hispanic Democrats, and dramatic increase in the number of white Republicans. So that's it for our snippets for this week. Hope everyone is doing well.